Perhaps it was the pandemic that forced us to sit down and look. Perhaps it was the political climate. Perhaps the long arc of justice finally broke through invisible barriers of culture and privilege so that we could see more clearly. Yes, we've tried to fight for justice, but somehow this year was different. The killing of George Floyd and so many others could not be set aside, even in the anxiety of the pandemic. Thomas A. Dorsey wrote our next hymn, Precious Lord, as he was struggling through great grief. Dorsey was one of the founders of the Black Gospel movement, combining African American hymns and the stylings of blues and jazz. He wrote this of his tragedy. Back in 1932, I was 32 years old and a fairly new husband. My wife Nettie and I were living in a little apartment on Chicago's South Side. One hot August afternoon, I had to go to St. Louis, where I was to be the featured soloist at a large revival meeting. I didn't want to go. Nettie was in the last month of pregnancy with our first child, but a lot of people were expecting me in St. Louis. In the steaming St. Louis heat, the crowd called on me again and again. When I finally sat down, a messenger boy ran up with a Western Union telegram. I ripped open the envelope and pasted on the yellow form were the words, "Your wife just died." When I got back, I learned that Nettie had given birth to a boy. I swung between grief and joy, yet that night the baby died. I buried Nettie and our little boy together in the same casket. Then I fell apart. For days I closeted myself. I felt that God had done me an injustice. I didn't want to serve him anymore or write gospel songs. I just wanted to go back to that jazz world I once knew so well. I was lost in grief. Everyone was kind to me, especially a friend, Professor Fry, who seemed to know what I needed. On the following Saturday evening, he took me up to a neighborhood music school. It was quiet. The late evening sun crept through the curtained windows. I sat down at the piano, and my hands began to browse over the keys. Dorsey remembered an old hymn tune and created Precious Lord at that piano. He reminds us that the way to the light often goes through the storm, that we need spiritual support to weather the storm and to move our culture towards the future we wish to share. Our language for that spiritual support may not be Dorsey's, but we too must lean on Spirit for strength to weather that storm.